And all new today, a brand new snapshot of where support for former President Donald Trump stands right now. The former commander-in-chief getting nearly 80% of the vote in a straw poll conducted this weekend at the Turning Point USA Summit. That is a gathering of self-described youth activists from around the country. His closest rival in the potential field of 2024 Republican presidential candidates, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But he just received 19% of the vote. Before we get to 2024, however, we are just a few months away from this year's midterms, of course. And the former president, along with his former vice president, Mike Pence, have been busy endorsing various GOP candidates across the country. Both stopped in Arizona Friday to stump for their preferred candidates for governor. And the pair will both be in D.C. this week at dueling policy-focused events. So, with all of that as a backdrop, we want to turn to Julia Manchester, national politics reporter at The Hill, to help us get a clearer picture of the lines being drawn right now as we approach this November's election. Julia, great to see you as always.
Good to see you, Natasha.
So, Julia, first, let's talk about these straw poll results. Former President Trump running away with almost 80% of the vote among young Republicans who attended the Turning Point Summit this weekend. How seriously can we take these numbers? How much stock are you putting in them?
I have a couple of takeaways from this. First of all, I think it's notable that this straw poll was obviously conducted at a Turning Point USA Summit, that I believe was held in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis' own state. However, we do know that a number of grassroots activists did come from across the country for this. Look, I think when you get a lot of activists in the party, the grassroots, you are going to get a result that is particularly for someone who may be more conservative or who represents a more conservative wing of the party. And that is definitely reflected here in these polls. Governor DeSantis is absolutely in that same wing of the party. However, President Trump is seen as the leader of that wing of the party. So I think that's a number one takeaway. Another thing is, look, these are grassroots activists. This is the most conservative of the conservatives essentially gathering and taking part in these straw polls. And they do mirror other straw polls we've seen conducted at other conservative group summits really over the past year or so. However, I would say once we get into the pool of Republican primary voters in general, that becomes a bit more moderated. And what I mean is that you have people who aren't in that activist base, who may not be conservative, who may be more moderate, or may not particularly have favorable feelings to President Trump, and maybe more favorable to Governor DeSantis. In fact, we have seen a number of recent polls that show Governor DeSantis seemingly closing the gap with President Trump, or inching up to him. In fact, a poll that was released, I believe, last month from New Hampshire, the University of New Hampshire, showed that Governor DeSantis was actually leading Trump in a poll. So, I think we're going to get mixed results from these polls. It's a straw poll. We should take it with a grain of salt, but it definitely goes with what we've been seeing so far.
Interesting. I mean, that context so important. Yet again, it seems to be the theme of the show so far, but maybe not even a grain of salt, and maybe a teaspoon of salt to be looking at exactly what that group is. So both Trump and former VP Pence, meanwhile, were in Arizona on Friday to support candidates who are running against one another in the state's Republican primary for governor. And we've seen this in other states as well. Are there clear lines being drawn right now within the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think we are getting to see those clear lines being drawn, not only between former President Trump and Vice President Pence, but also between President Trump and the state establishments of the state Republican Party. So, for example, last week in Maryland, we saw that Trump's endorsed candidate, Dan Cox, in the gubernatorial primary in that state, he won that primary against Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's first pick for governor. So we're seeing Trump starting to square off with these more establishment figures. And I would absolutely say Vice President Pence is one of those figures. What I also think is interesting is this took place in Arizona just a few days, or a day after, I should say, the January 6th hearings of this week. Arizona is one of those states that President Trump has pushed to get the 2020 election results overturned. And we know that a number of his endorsed candidates in that state, including Carrie Lake, have pushed that unfounded unfounded theory that he had the presidential election stolen from him. So it was interesting to see the timeline of events with January 6th and then, of course, the two rallies in Arizona.
Wow. Well, and if we stick with the primaries for a second, a recent poll showed that Wyoming Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney was more than 20 points behind her primary opponent. Would you say that Cheney's high-profile role with the January 6th committee is hurting her reelection chances?
I think it's very possible that it's hurting her reelection chances. I think in Wyoming, you obviously have a very staunch conservative base. And I think a lot of conservatives watching the January 6th hearings, look at it as potentially a waste of time or some sort of distraction. At the same time, though, you also have, for her opponent, Harriet Hageman, very much talking like Carrie Lake, like Dan Cox, touting that theory that President Trump had the election stolen from him. Clearly not true. However, they're still talking about it instead of other kitchen table issues like the economy, like inflation. So I think it could go a number of ways, but we'll have to see.
And very last thing, because we're almost out of time. This is so interesting, though. Just this morning, Cheney did not rule out a 2024 run against Trump in the presidential primary. Yes or no, do you think she would stand a chance?
We'll have to see. It depends who else is in the field. She certainly has a really good national fundraising base. And if she continues to build that up and to, expand that base, we'll see what happens. I think she could have pretty sturdy ground to stand on, but it depends on who's in the field.
All right, Julia Manchester with The Hill, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.